The wind hit like a fist, nearly tearing Charlotte Pierce from the stagecoach seat. Snow swirled in blinding sheets across the mountain pass, the driver's urgent shouts barely audible over the howling gale. She clutched the side rail with numb fingers, her heart hammering as the horses screamed and reared. Then the crack of splintering wood, the sickening lurch, and she was airborne. She hit the snow hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs, the world spinning white and violent around her. When she managed to lift her head, the overturned stagecoach was already disappearing into the storm, the driver clinging to the bolting horses, leaving her alone in the screaming wilderness. Her first coherent thought was that she was going to die. Her second was that she refused to. Charlotte had survived her husband's death at the Battle of Beecher Island, survived the pitying looks and empty condolences, survived 2 years of clawing her way through a world that had no place for widows without family or fortune. She would not die in a snowstorm on some godforsaken Colorado mountain. She staggered to her feet, her burgundy traveling dress already soaked through, the cold seeping into her bones with vicious efficiency. Through the white chaos, she could just make out a dark shape, a structure of some kind. The old way station, abandoned years ago according to the driver. It might be falling apart, but it had walls and a roof. That was more than the storm offered. She fought her way toward it, each step a battle, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized in the frozen air. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, and she threw herself against it with the last of her strength. It gave way with a groan, and she tumbled into darkness that smelled of old smoke and pine. For a moment, she simply lay there on the rough wooden floor, shaking so hard her teeth rattled, grateful for walls between her and the storm. Then she heard it, the metallic click of a gun being cocked, unmistakable and terrifying in the sudden quiet. A man's voice came from the shadows, low and rough, dangerous. He said just 3 words, but they made her blood freeze colder than the storm ever could. "Don't move, lady." Charlotte's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim interior. A single shaft of gray storm light filtered through a gap in the shuttered window, just enough to reveal the man standing in the far corner. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat covered in trail dust despite the snow. But it was what he held that made her throat close with fear. A Colt revolver, steady in his hand, pointed directly at her chest. She could see his face now, all hard angles and shadows, eyes that caught the faint light like a wolf's, handsome in a brutal sort of way, the kind of face that made respectable women cross the street, the kind of face she'd been taught to fear. "I'm not armed." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, the widow's mask she'd perfected over 2 years sliding into place despite her terror. The stagecoach overturned. "I need shelter from the storm." He didn't lower the gun. "This shelter's occupied. Then we'll share it." She pushed herself to sitting, refusing to show weakness even as her whole body trembled. "Because I'm not going back out there to die just because you got here first." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise, maybe, that she dared to argue. He moved forward slightly, and the light caught more of his features. Dark brown hair that touched his collar, unshaven jaw, a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Early 30s, she guessed, with the kind of lean, dangerous look that spoke of a hard life and harder choices. The kind of man her late husband would have arrested on sight. "You always this stupid?" he asked, but there was something almost like grudging respect in the words. "Or just today?" Stupid would be freezing to death to avoid inconveniencing a stranger. Charlotte got to her feet, swaying slightly, her sodden skirts clinging to her legs. "I'm staying. Shoot me if you must, but the law will find you when the storm clears." He studied her for a long moment, and she met his gaze without flinching, even as her heart tried to hammer through her ribs. She'd learned in her 2 years alone that men like this respected strength, not fear. Show weakness and they devour you. Finally, he lowered the gun, though he didn't holster it. He gestured to the fireplace with the barrel, where the remnants of a fire still glowed faintly. "There's wood. You know how to build a fire without burning the place down? I'm not an idiot. Jury's still out on that." But he holstered the gun and turned away, moving to the far corner where a battered saddle and bedroll sat. "Storm's not letting up. We're stuck here until it blows through. Could be hours, could be days. Days. Trapped in this tiny cabin with a man who looked like he'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again." Charlotte's hands shook as she moved to the fireplace, and not entirely from the cold. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But she was also alive, and that was something. She built up the fire with numb fingers, coaxing the embers back to life with the skill her husband had taught her during their brief marriage. The flames caught, spread, filled the small space with blessed warmth and dancing light that pushed back the shadows. As warmth began to seep back into her frozen limbs, Charlotte studied the cabin more carefully. One room, maybe 12 feet square. A fireplace, a crude table with 2 chairs, a single narrow bunk built into the wall. No privacy, no escape, and only one of them. The man had moved to the window, peering out through the gap at the raging storm. From this angle, she could see more of him. The way he held himself, coiled and ready. The gun belt riding low on his hips. The careful way he positioned himself so he could see both her and the door. A man expecting trouble. A man running from something. "What's your name?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Better to know who might kill her in her sleep. He glanced back, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Jacob. Jacob Thorne." The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. Everyone in Colorado Territory knew that name. Jacob Thorne. Wanted for the murder of a rancher outside Silver Creek 3 weeks ago. $500 reward. Armed and dangerous, the poster said. Do not approach. And she was locked in a one-room cabin with him, miles from help, with a blizzard raging outside. Her face must have shown her recognition because his expression went flat and cold. "So you've heard of me." Charlotte's mind raced. Lying would be pointless, but showing fear might be fatal. She straightened her shoulders and met his eyes. "The whole territory's heard of you. You're wanted for murder." "I didn't kill Frank Morrison." His voice was hard as the wind outside. "But nobody's interested in the truth when they've got a convenient suspect and a rich man's money pushing for a hanging. That's what they all say." His laugh was bitter. "Yeah, I suppose it is." He turned back to the window, dismissing her. "Storm's getting worse. We're stuck here until tomorrow at the earliest. Maybe longer. You can take the bunk. I'll sleep on the floor by the fire." How generous. The murderer giving up his bed. He spun back, and the raw anger in his face made her step back despite herself. I'm not a murderer. Frank Morrison was dead when I got there. I tried to help him, and his foreman saw me and assumed the worst. Then Warren Hayes showed up, Morrison's business partner, and he made damn sure everyone believed I did it. Hayes wants Morrison's land and he's using me to get it. But you don't have to believe me. Just stay on your side of the room, and we'll both survive this. The vehemence in his voice gave her pause. Murderers didn't usually defend themselves with that kind of passionate detail. Guilty men didn't look that haunted. She'd seen guilty men, plenty of them, during her husband's years as an army officer. This man looked many things: dangerous, desperate, angry. But he didn't look guilty. Still, believing him was a risk she couldn't afford. I'll take the bunk, she said quietly. Thank you. Something in his face shifted, the anger draining away into exhausted resignation. What's your name? Since we're going to be intimate roommates for the foreseeable future. Charlotte Pierce. She hesitated, then added, Widow Pierce. My husband was Captain James Pierce, 5th Cavalry. He died at Beecher Island 7 years ago. Recognition flickered in his eyes. I heard about that battle. I'm sorry for your loss. The conventional words, offered in that rough voice, somehow sounded sincere. Charlotte nodded stiffly and turned away, moving to the bunk. She needed to get out of her wet dress before the cold killed her. But stripping down with him watching was impossible. He seemed to sense her dilemma because he grabbed his bedroll and moved to the far corner, putting his back to her. I'll give you privacy. Tell me when you're decent. Charlotte's frozen fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons of her dress, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely manage. The burgundy wool was soaked through, heavy and clinging, and peeling it off felt like shedding a second frozen skin. Her petticoats were just as bad, her corset laces swollen with moisture and nearly impossible to undo. She managed finally, stripping down to her thin cotton chemise and drawers, both damp, but not dangerously so. There was a moth-eaten blanket on the bunk, and she wrapped it around herself, her bare feet like ice against the wooden floor. I'm covered, she said, her voice small in the storm-loud silence. Jacob turned back, and his eyes swept over her once, quick and assessing, before he moved to the fireplace and began hanging her wet things on a makeshift line he'd rigged from rope. His movements were efficient, practiced, the actions of a man who'd lived rough for a long time. When he reached for her corset, she nearly objected, but the thought of it freezing solid stopped her. Better embarrassment than death. You need to get warm, he said without looking at her. That bunk's got a blanket, but it's thin. You'll need the fire close, or you'll be hypothermic by morning. He was right, damn him. The cabin was barely warmer than the outside, the fire only managing to push back the cold in a small radius. Charlotte moved closer to the hearth, the blanket clutched around her, her wet hair dripping down her back. Jacob pulled off his own coat and hung it beside her dress, then his vest, leaving him in a dark work shirt that clung to broad shoulders. He had a canteen and some supplies in his saddlebag, which he retrieved and set on the table. Jerky and hardtack, he said. Not much, but it'll keep us alive. There's a creek about 50 yards from here, but going out in this storm would be suicide. We'll have to melt snow for water. How long do you think we're trapped here? He moved to the window again, studying the white fury beyond. Hard to say. Storm like this, in early winter, could blow through by morning. Or it could rage for 3 days. We'll know when we wake up. 3 days. Alone with Jacob Thorne. Charlotte sank onto one of the rickety chairs, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her body ached from the fall. Her hands and feet burned as feeling returned, and her head pounded with the beginning of what would surely be a vicious cold. She was trapped in a cabin with an accused murderer, miles from civilization, with no way to call for help. If he wanted to hurt her, there was nothing she could do to stop him. But as she watched him move around the cabin, checking the door, adding more wood to the fire, rationing out their meager supplies with careful precision, she found herself wondering if the posters had it wrong. He moved like a man used to taking care of himself, but also like a man used to taking care of others. When he brought her a piece of jerky and a tin cup of melted snow water, his hands were gentle, careful not to touch her. "Eat," he said. "You need your strength. So you can kill me later?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, fear making her cruel. His jaw tightened. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead already. I don't hurt women. Never have, never will. You're safe from me, Mrs. Pierce. I give you my word, for whatever that's worth to you." Charlotte studied his face in the firelight. Those gray-blue eyes held hers steadily, no deception in them that she could see. Killers could be charming, she knew that. Her husband had arrested men who smiled while they lied, but there was something in Jacob Thorne's face that spoke of a bone-deep weariness. A man tired of running and tired of being judged. Against all reason, against every instinct of self-preservation, she found herself believing him. "I'll take your word," she said quietly. "For tonight." He nodded, something like relief crossing his features. "That's all I'm asking, one night at a time." They ate in silence, the storm howling outside like a living thing, the fire crackling between them. Charlotte's mind churned with questions. If he was innocent, why was Warren Hayes so determined to see him hang? What had he been doing at Morrison's ranch that night? Where was he headed when the storm caught him? But asking felt dangerous, like opening a door she might not be able to close. So, she stayed quiet, finishing her jerky and water, her body slowly thawing in the fire's warmth. Jacob spread his bedroll on the floor near the hearth and lay down, his back to her, giving her what privacy he could in the tiny space. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Pierce. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Charlotte moved to the bunk, the thin blanket wrapped around her, her damp kameez still clinging uncomfortably. The narrow bed smelled of dust and old hay, but it was off the floor and marginally warmer than nothing. She lay down, exhaustion pulling at her, but sleep felt impossible. Every creak of the cabin made her tense. Every shift of Jacob's body by the fire sent her heart racing. She was acutely aware of him, just feet away, his breathing deep and even. A stranger, a criminal, a man who'd promised not to hurt her, a man she'd have to trust until the storm passed. The wind screamed around the cabin, snow building in drifts against the walls, and Charlotte closed her eyes, praying for morning and rescue. But deep in her heart, in a place she wouldn't acknowledge, a small traitorous part of her wondered what it would be like to not be rescued, to stay here, in this moment, where the rules of the world outside didn't apply, where she wasn't the tragic widow, and he wasn't the wanted killer. where they were just two people, surviving together against the cold. She pushed the thought away, buried it deep, and tried to sleep. Charlotte woke to gray morning light and the smell of coffee. She sat up with a gasp, disoriented, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, why she was nearly naked in a strange bed. Then it all came rushing back. The storm. The crash. Jacob Thorne. She looked toward the fireplace and found him there, crouched by the flames, a battered pot perched on the stones. He glanced over at the sound of her movement and quickly looked away, giving her privacy. "Your dress is dry," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "More or less. Coffee's almost ready." Charlotte grabbed her dress from the line, still warm from the fire, and pulled it on as quickly as her stiff fingers allowed. Her whole body ached, bruises blooming purple and yellow along her ribs and hip from the fall. Her head pounded, and her throat felt raw and scratchy, but she was alive, and that was more than she'd expected when she hit the snow yesterday. She laced her corset loosely, not bothering with proper tightness, and buttoned her dress with trembling hands. "How's the storm?" she asked, moving to the window. "Still going. Worse, if anything." Jacob poured coffee into 2 tin cups and held one out to her. "We're not leaving today." Charlotte took the cup, grateful for the warmth against her palms, and sipped carefully. It was bitter and strong, probably made from grounds he'd used 3 times already, but it was hot and real. She moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutter. White, nothing but white. The world erased by falling snow. The drifts against the cabin were already waist-high, and the wind showed no sign of easing. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "Before the storm." "Away." He didn't elaborate, settling onto one of the chairs and cradling his own cup. "Just away. Somewhere Hayes' money doesn't reach. That's not much of a plan." His smile was bitter. "It's the only plan I've got. What about you? Where was the stage headed?" "Denver. I was going to stay with my husband's sister." Charlotte wrapped both hands around the cup, soaking in its warmth. "She wrote to me 3 months ago, said she needed help with her children. Her husband travels for business, leaves her alone for weeks at a time. I thought perhaps I could be useful there. Make a new life. Running away too, then." The words stung because they were true. Charlotte had been running, fleeing Silver Creek and its pitying looks, its whispered gossip about the poor widow Pierce, who'd fallen so low she had to work as a seamstress just to eat. Running from the loneliness that ate at her soul, from the empty house that echoed with ghosts, from the life she'd built that crumbled when her husband died. She met Jacob's eyes over the rim of her cup and saw understanding there, the kind that came from shared experience. "I suppose I am," she admitted. "Is that so wrong?" "No." He looked into his coffee, his voice soft. "Sometimes running is the only thing that keeps you alive." They fell silent, the storm filling the quiet with its endless howl. Charlotte studied him in the gray morning light, seeing details she'd missed in last night's terror. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind, the calluses on his hands, the worn patches on his shirt. A working man, not a gentleman, but there was something in the way he held himself, a natural confidence that suggested he hadn't always been running. "Tell me what happened," she said suddenly. "At Morrison's ranch. I want to hear your version." Jacob's head came up, surprise flickering in those gray-blue eyes. "Why? You've already decided I'm guilty." "No. I've decided you're accused. There's a difference." Charlotte set down her cup and wrapped her arms around herself. "If we're going to be trapped here together, I'd like to know who I'm trapped with. So tell me, what happened that night?" He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she was sincere or setting some kind of trap. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair, his gaze going distant. "I was riding through Morrison's land, cutting across to save time getting to the next town. It was dusk, getting dark fast. I saw lights at the ranch house, smoke from the chimney, figured they were settled in for the night. Then I heard a gunshot." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I should have kept riding. Should have minded my own business. But my horse spooked at the sound, and something in my gut said it wasn't right. So I rode toward the house. Morrison was on the floor when I got there, shot twice in the chest. Still alive, but barely. I tried to stop the bleeding, but there was too much of it. He couldn't talk, couldn't tell me who'd done it. Just looked at me with these desperate eyes, like he was begging me to fix it. Then his foreman came running, saw me covered in blood with my hands on Morrison, and started yelling that I'd killed him. I tried to explain, but he had a rifle, and I had a reputation. So I ran." Charlotte listened, watching his face, the way his hands clenched around the cup. "And Warren Hayes? Showed up while I was running, saw me, covered in Morrison's blood, and put 2 and 2 together, and got 5. Or maybe he got exactly what he wanted." Jacob's voice went hard. "Hayes and Morrison were partners in a cattle operation, but Morrison owned the land. With Morrison dead and no will, the property goes to Hayes. Convenient, isn't it? Morrison dead, and a drifter with a past to pin it on. You think Hayes killed Morrison? I think Hayes benefits from Morrison's death. I think Hayes was awful quick to offer a reward and spread my name everywhere. I think an innocent man doesn't usually work that hard to make sure someone else hangs." Jacob drained his coffee and set the cup down with deliberate care. "But I can't prove any of it. And Hayes has money and influence, and I'm just a nobody with a history people would rather forget." "What kind of history?" He looked at her, and she saw the walls go up in his eyes. "The kind that makes people assume I'm guilty without asking questions." Charlotte wanted to push, wanted to know what he was hiding, but the set of his jaw told her she'd get nothing more right now. So she changed tactic. "If you're innocent, why not stay and fight? Prove Hayes wrong? With what?" His laugh was harsh. "I've got no money for a lawyer, no witnesses, and a whole territory ready to believe the worst of me. Hayes would have me hang before I could get a word out. Running was the only option that kept me breathing. That's not justice. No. But it's survival. And survival beats justice when you're the one with the noose around your neck." Charlotte had no answer for that. She'd seen enough of frontier justice to know he was probably right. A poor man accused of killing a rich one rarely got a fair trial, especially if the rich man's partner was pushing for a quick hanging. And if Hayes really had killed Morrison, he'd make sure Jacob never lived long enough to cast doubt. Still, the idea of an innocent man running forever, never able to clear his name, sat wrong in her chest. "So what will you do?" she asked. Keep running until Hayes's reach runs out? That's the plan. Get to Wyoming, maybe Montana. Start over somewhere nobody knows Jacob Thorne. He stood, moving restlessly to the window. Find work on a ranch. Keep my head down. Die an old man instead of a young one at the end of a rope. It's not much, but it's more than I'd get here. Charlotte watched him stand there, silhouetted against the white fury beyond the window, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Whatever he'd done, or hadn't done, whatever history he was running from, he was just a man trying to survive. Just like her. Both of them fleeing lives that didn't fit anymore, searching for places where they could breathe. In that, they weren't so different. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for what happened to you, guilty or innocent. It's a hard road you're walking. He glanced back, surprise clear on his face. You believe me? I don't know. Honesty seemed important, here in this small space where they had nowhere to hide. But I think you believe you're innocent. And that's something. Jacob turned fully to face her, and the look in his eyes was raw, vulnerable, in a way that made her breath catch. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. For listening. For not assuming. It's been a long time since anyone gave me that much. The moment stretched between them, weighted with something Charlotte couldn't name. Then he turned away, breaking the spell, and moved to gather more wood for the fire. The day stretched ahead, endless and intimate. And Charlotte found herself both dreading and anticipating the hours to come, dreading the forced proximity, the discomfort of sharing this space with a stranger, but anticipating something else, something she wouldn't let herself examine too closely. The way he moved, the sound of his voice, the careful gentleness with which he treated her, as if she were something precious and breakable. She pushed the thoughts away and moved to help him with the wood, determined to be useful, to contribute. If they were stuck here together, she wouldn't be a burden. They worked in silence, building up the fire against the cold, their movements falling into an easy rhythm that felt far too natural for two people who'd met less than 24 hours ago. And when their hands accidentally brushed reaching for the same piece of wood, the jolt that went through Charlotte had nothing to do with the cold. The day passed with agonizing slowness. The storm showed no sign of letting up, snow piling higher against the walls, until the cabin felt buried alive. Jacob checked their supplies, rationing carefully, estimating they had maybe 3 days of food if they were careful. Charlotte melted snow for water, grateful for the task that gave her something to do besides sit and stare at him. They spoke little, both wrapped in their own thoughts, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt almost companionable, the quiet of two people who didn't need to fill every moment with noise. As afternoon faded into evening, Jacob surprised her by pulling a deck of cards from his saddlebag. You play poker? Charlotte couldn't help but smile. My husband taught me. He said a military wife needed to know how to hold her own at the officers' club. Good. Jacob shuffled with practiced ease. Penny ante. We'll use wood chips since neither of us has actual money. They played as darkness fell, and the fire burned low, the storm still raging beyond the walls. Charlotte was better than Jacob expected, and he said so, which made something warm bloom in her chest. They talked as they played. Small things, inconsequential things. Her childhood in St. Louis, his boyhood in Texas. Books they'd read, places they'd been. Nothing deep, nothing that required vulnerability. But with each hand dealt, each story shared, the walls between them lowered fractionally. When Charlotte won the final hand with a full house, Jacob laughed. A real laugh that transformed his face from hard and dangerous to something younger, lighter. "You hustled me, Mrs. Pierce. I won fairly, Mr. Thorne." "Jacob, we're past formality, don't you think? After all, we've been roommates for a whole day now." Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Charlotte, then, if we're dispensing with propriety." "Charlotte." The way he said her name, slow and careful, sent a shiver down her spine that she absolutely should not be feeling. She gathered the cards quickly, needing something to do with her hands, something to distract from the way his eyes held hers across the flickering firelight. This was dangerous territory, this easy intimacy, this warmth that had nothing to do with the flames between them. He was an accused murderer. She was a respectable widow. They were trapped by circumstance, nothing more. But as she lay in the narrow bunk that night, listening to his steady breathing from his bedroll by the fire, Charlotte couldn't quite convince herself that was all it was. She'd felt something today. Watching him move around the cabin, listening to his stories, seeing the man beneath the wanted poster, something she hadn't felt since James died. Something she had no business feeling at all. The second day dawned gray and cold, the storm still howling with undiminished fury. Charlotte woke to find Jacob already up, checking the door, trying to gauge how much snow had fallen. When he pulled it open a crack, a wall of white nearly poured into the cabin, and he shoved it closed again with a curse. "We're completely buried," he said, moving back to the fire. "Snow's over the doorframe. We try to dig out now, we'll just collapse it all down on ourselves. So we wait." Charlotte pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, the morning cold biting despite the fire. "How long can we last here? Food's getting low. 2 more days, maybe 3 if we really stretch it." He didn't meet her eyes. "Then we'll have to risk digging out, storm or no storm. 2 more days. Minimum." Charlotte's stomach clenched with anxiety, but also with something else she refused to name. 2 more days alone with Jacob Thorne. 2 more days in this suspended reality where the outside world didn't exist, where she didn't have to be the grieving widow, and he didn't have to be the wanted man. 2 more days of this dangerous, delicious proximity that made her heart race and her skin feel too tight. They fell into a routine that felt far too domestic for comfort. Jacob handled the fire and the heavy work. Charlotte organized their dwindling supplies and kept their living space as tidy as possible. They talked more on the second day, the topics growing deeper, more personal. He told her about his years as a ranch hand, the hard lessons learned working cattle and horses. She told him about her brief marriage, the joy cut short by James's death, the struggle of learning to survive alone. "You loved him," Jacob said quietly, and it wasn't a question. "I did." Charlotte stared into the fire, memories washing over her like waves. But it was a young love, if that makes sense. We were both so new to the world, so certain everything would work out. Then, he died. And I learned that certainty is an illusion, that everything can change in a heartbeat. I know that lesson. Jacob's voice was rough with old pain. Lost people too. Lost myself for a while, if I'm honest. Charlotte looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the shadows in his eyes, Who did you lose? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My brother, Samuel. He was 2 years younger than me. Followed me everywhere when we were kids. Thought I hung the moon." Jacob's hands clenched. "When the war came, I enlisted. Texas Cavalry. Samuel wanted to come too, but I told him no. Told him to stay home and take care of our mother. He listened to me. He stayed." Charlotte waited, sensing there was more, that this was a wound still raw despite the years. He died anyway. Fever took him, 3 months after I left. My mother wrote me, but the letter took weeks to reach me. By the time I got it, he'd been dead for a month. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell him. Jacob's voice broke, and he looked away, his jaw working. I should have been there, should have been home, not off playing soldier. Without thinking, Charlotte reached across the small space and laid her hand on his. His skin was warm, calloused, and he went very still at her touch. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "You couldn't have known. Doesn't make it hurt less." But he didn't pull his hand away. Instead, his fingers curled around hers, holding on like she was an anchor in a storm. After Samuel died, I stopped caring much about living. Took stupid risks, picked fights I should have walked away from, got a reputation as a man with nothing to lose, because it was true. I had nothing. Was nothing. "You're not nothing, Jacob." He looked at her then, and the raw vulnerability in his face stole her breath. "How do you know? You've known me 2 days. I know you gave me the bed and took the floor. I know you shared your supplies without hesitation. I know you've been nothing but gentle and respectful, despite being alone with me in the middle of nowhere." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "I know you grieve your brother, which means you loved him. And I know you're fighting to survive, which means some part of you still thinks life is worth living. That's not nothing, Jacob. That's everything." The silence that fell between them was thick, charged with something electric. Jacob's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, the gesture unconscious, intimate. Charlotte knew she should pull away, knew this was crossing a line she couldn't uncross. But she couldn't make herself let go. His touch felt like coming home after years in the cold. Charlotte. Her name on his lips was half prayer, half warning. "This is a bad idea. I know. You're a respectable widow. I'm a wanted man. We've got no future. I know that too. Then why are you still holding my hand?" Charlotte met his eyes, her heart hammering. "Because for 2 days, I felt more alive than I have in 2 years. Because you see me, not the tragic widow everyone pities. Because when you look at me, I remember I'm still a woman. Not just a ghost in morning clothes." She took a shaky breath. "Because I don't want to let go." Jacob made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a prayer. He lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes burn with unshed tears. "You're dangerous, Charlotte Pierce. More dangerous than any bounty hunter. Why? These hier Nord are supposed to between hier Rakedat space. Ze last around her. The meant to mean strust to when the rid stream. This place where lost allows white. And then tired. Cones straining attention tighter. But also minded then, all the climb and to respawns the twice. Because you make me want things I can't have. Make me hope for things that'll only get us both hurt. But even as he said it, he didn't let go of her hand. He held on, his eyes locked with hers, the fire crackling between them and the storm howling outside, and nothing else in the world existing beyond this moment, this connection. Charlotte should have been afraid of what she was feeling, should have pulled back and rebuilt the walls of propriety. But she was so tired of being afraid, so tired of being alone, so tired of pretending she didn't need anyone. For 2 years she'd been frozen, locked in grief and propriety, going through the motions of life without actually living. Jacob Thorne, with his tragic eyes and gentle hands and dangerous reputation, was melting something inside her that she thought frozen forever. "Maybe I want to be hurt," she whispered. "Maybe I'd rather feel something, even pain, than feel nothing at all." His eyes darkened, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. She could see the war in his face, desire battling with honor, need fighting against what was right. Then he slowly, deliberately, released her hand and stood, putting distance between them. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rough. "I'll take first watch. Make sure the fire doesn't die." Charlotte felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache, but she recognized the gift he was giving her. The chance to step back from the edge, to preserve what remained of her reputation and his honor. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt hollow, disappointed, aching for something she couldn't name. She moved to the bunk without a word, lying down with her back to him, the blanket pulled tight. But sleep was impossible. Every nerve in her body was alive, aware of him just feet away, aware of what had almost happened, aware of the want that pulsed between them like a living thing. She heard him moving around the cabin, tending the fire, checking the door, doing anything to stay occupied. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he was as affected as she was, that he wanted her as much as she wanted him, that only his rigid self-control was keeping them both safe. But safe from what? From scandal? From gossip? Those things mattered in Silver Creek, mattered in the civilized world. But here, in this snow-buried cabin at the edge of nowhere, what did reputation matter? What did propriety count for when tomorrow might bring death in the storm? Charlotte closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her body hummed with unfulfilled longing, and her heart ached with the knowledge that this fragile connection they'd built would end the moment the storm did. The third day brought no relief from the snow. If anything, the storm intensified, wind battering the cabin until the walls groaned and snow found its way through every crack and crevice. Jacob spent the morning trying to reinforce the door, worried the weight of the snow would collapse it inward. Charlotte helped where she could, but mostly she watched him work, mesmerized by the play of muscle under his shirt, the competent way he handled the rough wood and leather bindings. Their supplies were critically low now. 1 more day of jerky and hardtack. 2 if they have their already meager portions. The coffee was gone. The last of it consumed that morning in silence thick, with unspoken words. They'd have to dig out tomorrow, risk or no risk, or face starvation. The knowledge hung between them, adding urgency to every moment, every glance, every accidental touch. "Tell me something," Charlotte said as they sat by the fire that afternoon, rationing their lunch into portions that barely qualified as food. "Something true. Something you've never told anyone. Jacob looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. Why? Because we might die tomorrow trying to dig out of here. Because I want to know you, the real you, before that happens. She met his gaze steadily. Please. He was quiet for a long moment, chewing jerky slowly, his eyes distant. Then he said, I can't read. Charlotte blinked, not understanding at first. What? I can't read. Never learned how. My father died when I was 6, and my mother needed me working to keep us fed. No time for school. Samuel got a few years of education, but I never did. Jacob's jaw tightened. I'm 32 years old, and I can't read my own name on a wanted poster. Have to ask people what it says. Pretend I'm checking if they have the details right. It's humiliating. The confession cost him. She could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. And in that moment, Charlotte understood something fundamental about Jacob Thorne. His entire life had been shaped by circumstances beyond his control. Poverty that stole his childhood, war that stole his brother, prejudice that stole his future. He'd never had a fair chance, and still he'd fought to be a good man, to do right, to survive with his honor intact. I could teach you, she said softly. His head jerked up. What? I could teach you to read. I taught soldiers at the fort, the ones who'd never had schooling. It's not that hard once you know the basics. Charlotte felt suddenly shy under his intense stare. We have time. We're not going anywhere today. Why would you do that for me? Because you gave me your bed and your food and kept me safe. Because you've been kind when you had no reason to be. Because everyone deserves to read their own name. She smiled slightly. And because I have nothing else to offer you in return for your protection. Jacob stared at her for a long moment, and Charlotte saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face. Disbelief. Hope. Something that looked dangerously like tenderness. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right. Teach me. They spent the afternoon with Charlotte scratching letters in the dirt by the fireplace with a stick, showing him the shapes, the sounds, the way they fit together to make words. Jacob was a quick study despite his embarrassment, absorbing information like a man dying of thirst. She started with his name, showing him the J, the A, the COB, watching his face as he traced the letters with his finger, sounding them out. Jacob, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That's me. That's my name. That's you, Charlotte confirmed, and had to blink back tears at the wonder in his face. They moved on to other words, simple ones at first. Cat, dog, tree, snow, then harder ones. Storm, cabin, safe. With each word he mastered, his confidence grew, his smile coming more easily. Charlotte found herself leaning closer, their shoulders touching as they bent over the dirt floor, her hand guiding his as he formed letters. The intimacy of it was different from last night's charged moment, but no less powerful. This was teaching, nurturing, building something together. It felt profound in a way she couldn't articulate. As evening fell and the light grew too dim to see the letters clearly, Jacob turned to her, his face serious. Thank you. Nobody thought I was worth teaching before. Then they were fools. Charlotte held his gaze. You're one of the smartest men I've known, Jacob. You just never had the chance to prove it. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing thick with unspoken words. Jacob lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of auburn hair back from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek, calloused and warm, and Charlotte's breath caught. "Charlotte," he murmured, "we need to talk about what's happening here." "I know what's happening." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not a fool, Jacob. I know this is temporary. I know when the storm ends, we go our separate ways. You keep running, I go to Denver, and we never see each other again. Is that what you want?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Charlotte knew the answer she should give, the proper response that would keep them both safe from attachment, from pain, from the impossible yearning that burned in her chest. But sitting here in the firelight, his hand on her face, his eyes holding hers with such naked longing, she couldn't lie. "No," she breathed. "It's not what I want at all." Jacob closed his eyes, his hand falling away from her face, and Charlotte felt the loss like a knife. "Charlotte, I can't give you a future. I can't give you anything but trouble and heartache. You deserve better than a wanted man with nothing to his name." "Don't tell me what I deserve." Anger sparked in her chest, hot and sudden. "I'm a grown woman, Jacob Thorne. I've buried a husband, survived alone for 2 years, crossed half a territory by myself. I know what I want, and I know what I'm willing to risk for it. And what do you want?" His voice was rough, dangerous, challenging. Charlotte met his eyes without flinching. "I want to feel alive again. I want to stop being afraid of every feeling, every connection. I want to remember what it's like to want someone, to be wanted by someone." She took a shaky breath. "I want you, Jacob. Just for tonight. Just for this moment. I want you. Is that so wrong?" The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Jacob's eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign she didn't mean it. Charlotte held her ground, her chin lifted, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Then he moved, closing the distance between them in a rush, his hands framing her face as his lips found hers. The kiss was everything Charlotte had forgotten, everything she denied herself for 2 long years. Jacob's lips were warm and firm against hers, moving with a gentleness that made her throat tight. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something worth protecting. And Charlotte melted into him with a small sound that was half sob, half surrender. Her hands found his shoulders, holding on, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate, and absolutely necessary. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Charlotte, if we do this, there's no going back. You understand that?" "I understand." She was done being cautious, done being the proper widow who never took risks. "I want this, Jacob. I want you. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them. But I won't regret this. I won't regret you." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, his hands sliding into her hair and scattering the pins that held it up. Auburn waves tumbled down around her shoulders, and Jacob pulled back just far enough to look at her, his eyes dark with desire. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "So damn beautiful it hurts to look at you." Charlotte felt heat flood her face, her body. No one had called her beautiful in years. No one had looked at her with that kind of hunger, that kind of reverence. She reached up and traced the scar through his eyebrow, the rough line of his jaw, learning the landscape of his face with her fingertips. "You're not so bad yourself, Mr. Thorne." His smile was slow and devastating. "Jacob. Just Jacob. No formality between us now." "Jacob," she agreed, and kissed him again because she couldn't help herself. Because he was right there, and she wanted him, and nothing else mattered. They moved together to the narrow bunk, still kissing, hands exploring carefully, respectfully. Jacob's touch was gentle despite the roughness of his hands, and Charlotte found herself trusting him completely, surrendering to sensation in a way she hadn't since James. But this was different. Deeper. Because she was different. She wasn't the naive girl who'd married at 18. She was a woman who'd survived loss and loneliness, who knew exactly what she was choosing and why. That night, wrapped in Jacob's arms as the fire burned low and the storm raged outside, Charlotte felt something inside her that had been frozen for 2 years begin to thaw. She traced the scars on his chest, learning the stories written on his skin, while he held her close and whispered things that made her heart ache with their tenderness. They talked in the darkness, sharing secrets and dreams, building a connection that went far beyond the physical. And when she finally drifted off to sleep with her head on his shoulder, Charlotte felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt hope. The fourth morning brought a terrifying change. The storm had stopped. Charlotte woke to silence. The endless howl of wind replaced by an eerie quiet that raised the hair on her neck. She sat up, disoriented, the blanket falling away. Jacob was already awake, standing by the window, his body tense. "The storm's passed," he said without turning. "We need to dig out before the snow sets like concrete." Reality crashed back with brutal force. The storm was over. Their suspended moment was ending. Soon they'd be back in the world where he was a wanted man and she was a respectable widow, and what had happened between them last night was impossible, forbidden. Charlotte felt her throat tighten with grief for something that was ending before it had really begun. But she pushed the feeling down and stood, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. "How much snow is there?" "Hard to tell from in here. Several feet at least." Jacob finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her chest ache. "Charlotte, about last night?" "Don't." She held up a hand, unable to bear it if he apologized, if he called it a mistake. "Last night was exactly what I wanted it to be. No regrets, remember?" "No regrets," he echoed, but something in his voice said he had them anyway. He moved toward her, reaching out to touch her face one more time. "You're an extraordinary woman, Charlotte Pierce. I hope you know that. And you're a good man, Jacob Thorne, no matter what the posters say." Charlotte captured his hand, holding it against her cheek. "When we get out of here, what will you do?" "Keep running. Head north into Wyoming, maybe Montana. Find work. Keep my head down." His jaw tightened. "Try to forget that for 4 days I had something worth staying for." The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. "Jacob, we should start digging." He pulled away gently but firmly, ending the moment before it could become something too painful to bear. "The longer we wait, the harder it gets." They worked together to clear the door, using pieces of wood to scrape and shove at the packed snow. It was brutal labor, made worse by their weakened state from days of rationed food. Charlotte's hands went numb almost immediately, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But she kept going. Each shovelful of snow that they moved was one step closer to freedom. One step closer to goodbye. It took hours. By the time they finally broke through, both of them were soaked with sweat despite the cold, shaking with exhaustion. Brilliant sunlight poured through the opening, blindingly bright on the endless white landscape. The world had been transformed into something alien and beautiful, every tree and rock buried under feet of pristine snow. Jacob squeezed through the opening first, then reached back to help Charlotte out. She took his hand and let him pull her into the light, gasping at the bitter cold and the shocking beauty of it all. The sky was a heartbreaking blue, cloudless and perfect. The sun sparkled off the snow like diamonds, and there, in the distance, was the road, or where the road should be, buried, but still traceable. "We made it," Charlotte whispered, and wasn't sure if she was relieved or devastated. Jacob still held her hand, his grip tight. "Charlotte, I need to say this before we go our separate ways. These 4 days with you, they've been the best of my life. You made me remember what it's like to be human, to be cared for, to matter to someone. I'll carry that with me wherever I go." Tears burned Charlotte's eyes. "I'll carry you with me too. Always." She squeezed his hand. "Be safe, Jacob. Find somewhere that's good to you. Build a life worth living. You too." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles like he had that first night. But this time the gesture was farewell. "Go to Denver. Let your sister-in-law's family love you. Let yourself be happy. You deserve that." They stood there in the blinding snow, hands joined, neither wanting to be the first to let go. But reality was creeping back in, cold and unforgiving. Charlotte could see it in Jacob's face. The walls rebuilding. The wanted man remembering he had to keep running, and she felt her own armor sliding back into place. The proper widow who couldn't afford scandal, who couldn't love a criminal no matter how innocent he claimed to be. Finally, Charlotte forced herself to pull her hand away. "Goodbye, Jacob Thorne." "Goodbye, Charlotte Pierce." His voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "Be well." He turned and walked away through the snow, not looking back, his footprints dark against the white. Charlotte watched until he disappeared around a bend in the road, heading north toward whatever uncertain future waited for him. Then she turned south, toward Silver Creek and civilization, and the life she was supposed to want. But with every step, her heart screamed at her to turn back, to run after him, to choose the impossible over the practical, love over safety, him over propriety. Charlotte made it perhaps 100 yards before she stopped, her chest heaving with sobs she couldn't contain. This was wrong. Walking away was wrong. She'd spent 2 years being the dutiful widow, the proper lady, the woman who never caused trouble or scandal. And for what? To be alone and miserable and half dead inside? Jacob had made her feel alive again. He'd seen her, truly seen her, in a way no one had since James died. He'd been gentle and kind and respectful, despite having every reason not to be. and she was just going to let him walk out of her life forever, because society said she should, because it was the safe choice. To hell with safe. Charlotte had been safe for 2 years, and it had nearly killed her. She spun around and ran back the way she'd come, her skirts hampering her, snow soaking through her boots. "Jacob!" she screamed. "Jacob, wait!" In the distance, his dark figure stopped, turned. Charlotte ran harder, her lungs burning, her heart racing. "Jacob!" When she reached him, she grabbed his coat with both hands, looking up into his shocked face. "I can't do it. I can't walk away. I can't go back to that half-life of proper widowhood and loneliness. I can't pretend the last 4 days didn't matter." "Charlotte, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I choose you." The words burst from her like a confession, reckless and true. "I choose you over safety, over reputation, over everything the world says I should want. If you'll have me. If you want me with you." Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "I know it's insane. I know you're running from the law, and we have no money and no future, and it's the most impractical decision I could possibly make. But Jacob, I'd rather have a short, dangerous, beautiful life with you than a long, safe, empty one without you. So if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, if there's any chance at all, I'm asking you to take me with you." Jacob stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Then his hands came up to frame her face, and he was kissing her desperately, hungrily, like a man who'd been given a miracle he didn't deserve. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Are you sure?" His voice shook. "Charlotte, I'm not exaggerating the danger. Hayes will keep hunting me. We'll have to keep moving, keep hiding. We'll have nothing. Less than nothing. You're giving up everything respectable and safe for a wanted man who can't even read his own name. Are you absolutely sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Charlotte held his gaze steadily. "I love you, Jacob Thorne. I know it's crazy. I know it's too fast, but it's true. I love you, and I want to be with you, whatever that means. Teach you to read properly, help you clear your name, build a life somewhere far from here. Whatever it takes, I want to do it together." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out. "I love you too. God help me. I fell in love with you, somewhere between your stubborn refusal to freeze and your kindness in teaching me letters. You're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known, and I don't deserve you. But if you're willing to take this risk, I swear I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise instead of goodbye. And Charlotte felt something settle into place in her chest, a rightness she'd been missing for years. This was what she'd been searching for, this feeling of coming home. Not a place, but a person. Not safety, but love. "So where do we go?" she asked when they finally broke apart, both smiling despite everything. "North. Montana Territory, maybe. Somewhere Hayes' influence doesn't reach." Jacob took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We'll find work, save money, figure out how to clear my name from a distance. It won't be easy." "I don't need easy." Charlotte squeezed his hand. "I just need you." They turned together and began walking north, following the path Jacob had already broken through the snow. Behind them, Silver Creek in Denver and the respectable life Charlotte was supposed to want faded into the distance. Ahead lay only uncertainty, danger, and an outlaw's precarious existence. But Charlotte felt lighter than she had in years. Free in a way she'd forgotten was possible. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that was worth any risk. They walked for hours through the pristine landscape, the snow crunching under their boots, the sun brilliant overhead, but offering little warmth. Charlotte's legs ached and her stomach gnawed with hunger. But she felt a strange exhilaration, the rush of having made an irrevocable choice. She'd burned her bridges. There was no going back to Silver Creek now, no pretending she was still the respectable widow. She'd chosen love over reputation, and the freedom of that choice was intoxicating. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Jacob spotted smoke in the distance. They approached cautiously, finding a small homestead tucked into a valley, a rough cabin with a barn and a few outbuildings. An older couple lived there, weathered frontier folk, who looked at the bedraggled pair with suspicion, until Charlotte explained about the stagecoach accident and being stranded in the storm. The woman, Mrs. Garrett, softened immediately and brought them inside, insisting they eat and warm themselves. Her husband, grizzled and quiet, studied Jacob with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. But he said nothing about wanted posters or suspicious circumstances. Just offered Jacob work, mucking out the barn, in exchange for a hot meal and a place in the hayloft for the night. Over Mrs. Garrett's venison stew and fresh bread, Charlotte spun a story about being newlyweds heading north to join Jacob's brother in Montana. The lies came easier than she'd expected, perhaps because they weren't entirely lies. They might not be legally married, but the bond forged in that snowbound cabin felt more real than any ceremony. And heading north to start fresh was the absolute truth. Mrs. Garrett clucked sympathetically and offered Charlotte a spare dress, simpler and more practical than her burgundy traveling gown. "You'll need clothes better suited to hard living, dear. Frontier life isn't kind to fine things." That night, lying in the Garrett's hayloft wrapped in blankets with Jacob's arms around her, Charlotte felt the enormity of what she'd done finally sink in. She'd thrown away everything secure for a man she'd known less than a week. She'd abandoned her responsibilities, her dead husband's memory, the entire life she'd built. By society's standards, she'd become a fallen woman, little better than a prostitute, running off with a wanted man. But Jacob's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers, and Charlotte couldn't regret it. This felt right, in a way nothing had since James died. Maybe she was insane. Maybe she'd regret this when reality crashed down harder. But right now, in this moment, she was happy, and that was enough. The next morning, Jacob worked for Mr. Garrett, while Charlotte helped Mrs. Garrett with washing and mending. The older woman chattered about her own journey west as a young bride, the hardships and joys of frontier life. She asked no probing questions, offered no judgment, just treated Charlotte with the kindness of one woman to another. When they left that afternoon with a bundle of food and Mrs. Garrett's spare dress, Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes at the unexpected generosity. "There's good people out here," Jacob said as they walked north again. "Not everyone believes the worst without asking questions. We'll find our place, Charlotte. Somewhere we can build a life." They traveled for days, walking when they had to, catching rides with freighters when they could. Jacob did odd jobs at farms and ranches along the way, always moving before anyone might recognize him from the wanted posters. Charlotte learned quickly how to fade into the background, how to be unremarkable, how to support their deception with carefully crafted stories. It was exhausting and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. At night, in whatever shelter they found, Jacob continued his reading lessons. Charlotte taught him with scraps of newspaper they found, with labels from cans, with anything that had words. His progress was remarkable, his hunger for knowledge insatiable. Within 2 weeks, he could read simple sentences. Within 3, he was tackling more complex passages with only occasional help. Watching his face light up as the written word unlocked for him was one of Charlotte's greatest joys. They crossed into Wyoming territory in early December, the landscape growing more rugged and wild. Game was scarce, and there were nights they went to bed with empty stomachs. But Jacob was resourceful, trapping rabbits and squirrels, trading labor for food, stretching every penny they managed to scrape together. Charlotte proved tougher than either of them expected, never complaining about the cold or the hunger, matching Jacob's endurance step for step. It was in a small Wyoming town called Bent Creek that everything changed. They'd stopped to buy supplies with the few coins Jacob had earned chopping wood. Charlotte waited outside the general store while Jacob went in, keeping her head down, unobtrusive. She was studying the cloudy sky, wondering if more snow was coming, when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. Well, well, if it isn't the grieving widow Pierce. Charlotte's head snapped up. Warren Hayes stood 10 feet away, impeccably dressed despite the frontier setting, his smile sharp as a knife. He was a handsome man in his 40s, silver threading through his dark hair, the kind of sophisticated charm that made people trust him. Charlotte had met him once in Silver Creek, found him oily and false. Now she understood why. "Mr. Hayes." She kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I'm surprised to see you so far north. Business takes me all over the territory. Cattle concerns, you understand." His eyes swept over her, taking in her simple dress, her worn boots, the way she stood like she was ready to run. "Though I must say, I'm more surprised to see you. Last I heard, you were heading to Denver to stay with family. Yet here you are, in the middle of nowhere, looking rather less prosperous than when you left Silver Creek." Charlotte's mind raced. Did he know about Jacob? Had he connected her disappearance with Jacob's flight north? "The stagecoach had an accident in the storm," she said carefully. "I've been making my way as best I can." "Alone?" Hayes' smile widened. "How unfortunate, and how convenient that you're heading in the same direction as Jacob Thorne, that murderer I've been tracking." He took a step closer, and Charlotte fought the urge to back away. "Tell me, Mrs. Pierce, have you seen Thorne in your travels? He's a dangerous man. I'd hate to think of a lady like you encountering him unprotected." "I haven't seen anyone matching that description." The lie came smoothly, desperately. "I've been careful to avoid solitary men on the road." "Of course you have." Hayes studied her face, and Charlotte had the terrible feeling he could see right through her. "Still, if you do happen to encounter Thorne, you should know there's a reward. $500 for information, leading to his capture. A considerable sum for a widow with limited means. You could rebuild your life with that kind of money." "I'll keep that in mind." Charlotte glanced toward the store, praying Jacob would sense danger and stay inside. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Hayes, I need to continue on my way." "Certainly. But Mrs. Pierce?" Hayes' voice stopped her. "A word of advice. Jacob Thorne is a killer. Whatever lies he might tell Whatever sob story about innocence, don't believe him. He murdered Frank Morrison in cold blood, and he'll kill again if cornered. If you're smart, you'll stay far away from him. And if you're wise, you'll tell me if you see him. For your own safety. Charlotte forced herself to nod and walk away, her legs trembling, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. She made it around the corner of the building before she let herself run, heading for the alley where she and Jacob had agreed to meet. He emerged from the back of the store just as she arrived, and one look at her face told him something was wrong. What happened? He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes scanning for threats. Warren Hayes. Charlotte clutched his coat. He's here, Jacob. In town. He saw me. I don't think he knows we're together, but he's suspicious. He mentioned you by name, said he was tracking you. Jacob's face went hard. Did he threaten you? No, but Jacob, he's close. Too close. We need to leave. Now. They abandoned the supplies and slipped out of town through back ways and alleys, moving fast and quiet. Charlotte's pulse didn't slow until they were miles away, deep in the wilderness, with no sign of pursuit. But the encounter had shaken them both. Hayes wasn't just offering rewards and hoping someone else caught Jacob. He was actively hunting, following leads, getting closer. That night, huddled in a makeshift camp with no fire for fear of being spotted, Jacob held Charlotte close and spoke quietly. I'm putting you in danger. Hayes seeing you, connecting you to me, that's bad. If he thinks you're helping me, you become an accomplice. You could hang too. Then we make sure he doesn't catch us. Charlotte tilted her face up to look at him in the moonlight. I'm not leaving you, Jacob. We've come too far for that. Charlotte, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Reasonable would have been staying in Silver Creek and dying slowly of loneliness. This, us, running together and building something real, this is the only reasonable thing I've done in years. She cupped his face with both hands. I love you. Hayes doesn't change that. Danger doesn't change that. Nothing changes that. Jacob closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. You're either the bravest woman alive or the most foolish. Can't I be both? His laugh was quiet and pained. Yeah, I guess you can. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. All right, we keep going, but we need to be smarter. Stay off main roads, avoid towns where we can. And Charlotte, if Hayes catches up to us, you run. You hear me? You don't try to protect me. You don't try to be noble. You just run and save yourself. I won't promise that. Charlotte. I won't. She met his eyes steadily. We're in this together, Jacob. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what love means. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her impossibly closer, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you, he whispered. But God help me. I'm grateful for you every single day. They pushed deeper into the wilderness, traveling by night when possible, hiding during the day. The cold intensified as December deepened, and there were nights Charlotte thought they might freeze despite huddling together for warmth. But they survived, day by day, mile by mile. Jacob's determination and Charlotte's resilience carrying them through. It was Jacob's reading that saved them, ironically. He'd been practicing with an old newspaper they'd found, slowly working through an article about territorial news. Suddenly he stopped, his finger frozen on a line of text. "Charlotte, listen to this." He read haltingly but clearly. "Morrison partner Hayes under investigation for fraud. Territorial marshal reviewing land deals. Questions raised about Morrison's death." Charlotte's breath caught. "What? Let me see." She took the newspaper, scanning the article quickly. It was dated 2 weeks ago, from a Cheyenne paper. According to the article, a territorial marshal had begun investigating Warren Hayes' business dealings after several ranchers complained about fraudulent land transfers. And in the course of that investigation, questions had arisen about the circumstances of Frank Morrison's death. "Jacob, this is it. This is what we need." Charlotte looked up, hope blazing in her chest. If they're investigating Hayes, if they're questioning Morrison's death, maybe they'll listen to your side of the story. Or maybe they'll just hang me faster to close the case. But Jacob's eyes held a spark of something that looked like hope. Still, it's more than we had yesterday. We need to get to Cheyenne. Talk to this marshal. Present your case before Hayes can spin more lies. Charlotte's mind was already racing ahead, planning. If Hayes is under investigation, his credibility is damaged. This might be our only chance to clear your name. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring at the newspaper article. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we go to Cheyenne. But Charlotte, if this goes wrong, if they arrest me on sight, you get away clean. You tell them I kidnapped you, forced you to come with me. You save yourself. Jacob, promise me." His eyes were fierce. "Promise me if it goes bad, you'll do whatever it takes to stay free. I can't live with the thought of you hanging because of me." Charlotte wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but she saw the desperation in his face and recognized it for what it was. Love. He was willing to sacrifice everything, including her devotion, to keep her safe. So she nodded, the lie bitter on her tongue. "I promise." They turned east toward Cheyenne, traveling with new urgency. The territory was growing more settled the further they went. More farms and ranches. More people who might recognize Jacob from the wanted posters. They had to be more careful than ever, but also faster. If Hayes discovered the investigation, he might run or destroy evidence. Speed mattered now. 3 days from Cheyenne, disaster struck. They'd been careless, desperate, walking the main road in broad daylight to make better time. The riders appeared from behind them. 6 men on horseback, moving fast. Charlotte's stomach dropped when she recognized the lead rider's voice.
"Jacob Thorne! Hold there!"
Jacob grabbed Charlotte's hand and ran, pulling her off the road into the scrub brush. Behind them, the riders gave chase, whooping like they were hunting animals. Charlotte's skirts tangled around her legs, slowing her, and she knew with terrible certainty they wouldn't make it. They were on foot, exhausted, half-starved. The riders were fresh and motivated by reward money. Jacob must have known it too, because he suddenly stopped and pushed Charlotte behind him. "Stay back," he ordered, his hand going to the gun at his hip. The riders surrounded them in a loose circle, rifles and pistols drawn. Charlotte recognized 2 of them as Hayes' men from Silver Creek. The others were rough frontier types, bounty hunters drawn by the reward. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, grinned down at them. "Jacob Thorne, you've led us a merry chase. But it's over now. His eyes slid to Charlotte. "And who's this? The widow Pierce, unless I miss my guess. Mr. Hayes will be real interested to know you've been traveling with the murderer. She's not part of this." Jacob's voice was steady despite the guns pointed at him. "I forced her to come with me. Threatened her. She's a victim, not an accomplice." Charlotte opened her mouth to protest, but Jacob squeezed her hand in warning. He was trying to save her, spinning the story that would keep her from a noose. But the bounty hunter just laughed. "That's not what it looked like from where we were watching. Looked to me like you two are mighty friendly, holding hands, sharing body heat at night." His grin turned cruel. "Mr. Hayes said the widow might have taken up with you. Guess he was right. That makes her an accessory. She'll hang right alongside you, Thorne." "No!" Jacob stepped forward, and 6 guns cocked in response. "Listen to me. She's innocent. Whatever you think you saw, you're wrong. I kidnapped her after the stagecoach crash. She's been my hostage. Let her go and I'll come quietly." The bounty hunter considered, then shook his head. "Can't do that. Mr. Hayes wants her brought in too. Says she might have information. We take you both to Cheyenne. Let the law sort it out." He gestured with his rifle. "Now throw down your gun and put your hands up. Both of you." Jacob's hand tightened on his gun, and for a terrible moment Charlotte thought he might draw. Might try to shoot his way out, despite being outnumbered 6-1. But then his shoulders sagged in defeat, and he slowly pulled the gun from his holster and tossed it to the ground. The bounty hunters moved in quickly, one of them dismounting to tie Jacob's hands roughly behind his back. Another grabbed Charlotte, binding her wrists with rope that bit into her skin. "We got a camp about 5 miles back," the leader said. "We'll rest there tonight, head into Cheyenne in the morning. Mr. Hayes will be right pleased when we show up with both of you." They were hauled up onto horses, Charlotte forced to ride double with one of the bounty hunters, Jacob with another. The ride to the camp was miserable, the men making crude jokes about what they'd found, speculating about the reward money. Charlotte tried to catch Jacob's eye, tried to communicate somehow that they'd get through this. But he stared straight ahead, his face a mask of stone. The camp was a rough affair, a few tents and a fire pit in a sheltered draw. The bounty hunters shoved Jacob and Charlotte into one of the tents, their hands still bound, and posted a guard outside. In the dim light filtering through the canvas, Charlotte could finally look at Jacob properly. His face was bruised from where one of the men had hit him, blood crusting at the corner of his mouth. "Are you hurt?" she whispered. "I'm fine." "You?" Scared. There was no point lying. "Jacob, what are we going to do?" "We?" He shook his head. "Charlotte, when we get to Cheyenne, you stick to the kidnapping story. Tell them I threatened you, forced you. Make them believe it. It's your only chance. I won't lie about us. I won't let them think. You have to." Jacob's voice was fierce, urgent. "Listen to me. If you tell them the truth, that you came with me willingly, they'll hang you as an accomplice. Hayes will make sure of it. But if you're a victim, if you're the poor widow I abducted, they'll let you go. You'll be free. You can go to Denver like you planned. Live your life. Without you." Charlotte felt tears burning her eyes. "You're asking me to betray you to save myself. I'm asking you to live." Jacob leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "Charlotte, I love you, more than I thought I could love anyone. And because I love you, I need you to survive this. even if it means hating me. Even if it means lying about what we had. Promise me. Please. Charlotte closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I can't. Jacob, I can't. You can. You're the strongest person I know. You'll do what needs to be done. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. And Charlotte, if by some miracle I don't hang, if I somehow get free, I'll find you. I swear it. I'll find you, and we'll finish what we started. But first, you have to stay alive. Before Charlotte could respond, the tent flap opened, and the scarred leader stepped in. Awful cozy in here. Guess the widow likes her kidnapper. He grabbed Charlotte's arm and hauled her to her feet. Come on. You're sleeping in a different tent. Can't have you two plotting escape. Charlotte was dragged away despite her protests, forced into a separate tent with two of the bounty hunters standing guard. She lay awake all night on the cold ground, her wrists raw from the ropes, her heart breaking. Tomorrow, they'd reach Cheyenne. Tomorrow, their fate would be decided, and she had no idea how to save either of them. Morning came gray and cold, frost thick on the ground. The bounty hunters broke camp quickly, eager to get to Cheyenne and claim their reward. Charlotte was hauled back onto a horse, and they rode east with grim determination. As the day wore on, the landscape became more settled, farms and ranches appearing with increasing frequency. By late afternoon, Charlotte could see Cheyenne in the distance, a sprawling frontier town that represented either salvation or doom. They rode straight to the marshal's office, attracting attention from townspeople who stopped to stare. The bounty hunter leader dismounted and strode inside, emerging moments later with a tall, gray-haired man wearing a badge. The marshal studied Jacob with hard eyes, then turned that same assessing gaze on Charlotte. This is Jacob Thorne and Charlotte Pierce, the bounty hunter announced. Wanted for murder and kidnapping. We're here to collect our reward. The marshal frowned. Kidnapping? The poster I have just says murder. She helped him escape, Marshal. Been traveling with him for weeks. That makes her an accomplice. That's not true, Charlotte found her voice. He didn't kidnap me, but I'm not an accomplice either. I can explain everything if you'll just listen. The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Bring them both inside. And you boys wait outside while I sort this out. I don't conduct business with an audience. The bounty hunters grumbled, but complied, though they kept watch through the windows. Inside, the marshal untied Charlotte's hands first, then Jacob's. He gestured to chairs in front of his desk and settled into his own seat, steepling his fingers. All right, I'm Marshal Edward Grant, and before we go any further, you should both know that Warren Hayes is currently under investigation by this office for fraud and suspected involvement in Frank Morrison's death. So whatever you've got to say, I'm listening with an open mind. Mrs. Pierce, ladies first. What's your story? End quote. Charlotte's heart leaped with hope. She glanced at Jacob, saw him nod slightly, and took a breath. Marshal, I'm going to tell you the absolute truth. Jacob Thorne didn't kidnap me. I chose to go with him. I believe he's innocent of Morrison's murder, and I believe Warren Hayes is the real killer. Charlotte, no, Jacob started, but the marshal held up a hand. Let her talk, Thorne. Go on, Mrs. Pierce. So Charlotte told him everything. The stagecoach crash, being stranded in the cabin with Jacob, hearing his story about finding Morrison already shot. Hayes seeing her in Bent Creek and making threats. The decision to come to Cheyenne to clear Jacob's name. She left out the personal details, the intimacy that had grown between them. But she made it clear she'd come willingly, believing in Jacob's innocence. When she finished, Marshall Grant turned to Jacob. "Your turn. Tell me exactly what happened the night Morrison died." Jacob told the story again, in more detail this time, describing the layout of the ranch, Morrison's wounds, the foreman's arrival. He talked about his past, his rough reputation, the reasons Hayes had found it so easy to make him a scapegoat, and he talked about the article they'd found, the investigation into Hayes, the hope that maybe someone would finally listen to the truth. Marshall Grant listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally. When Jacob finished, the marshal sat back and studied them both. "Here's what I know. Warren Hayes and Frank Morrison were partners in a cattle operation. Morrison owned the land. Hayes handled sales and distribution. About 6 months ago, Morrison discovered Hayes was cooking the books, skimming profits. They had a falling out. Morrison threatened to dissolve the partnership and press charges." Charlotte's breath caught. So Hayes had motive. Considerable motive. Morrison's death gave Hayes control of the entire operation, and as a murder victim's business partner, Hayes got a lot of sympathy. Nobody looked too closely at his claims about the killer. Grant tapped his desk. "But Morrison's foreman, the one who saw you there, Thorne, he's had a change of heart. Came to me 2 weeks ago saying Hayes paid him to identify you as the killer. Said he's been eaten up with guilt ever since." Jacob's eyes widened. "He admitted Hayes paid him to lie?" "Signed a statement. Said you were already running when he arrived, that Morrison was clearly dead before you got there. But Hayes showed up and offered him money to say you did it. The foreman took the money, but his conscience has been eating at him." Grant leaned forward. "With his testimony, plus the evidence of fraud I've been building, I've got enough to arrest Hayes. But I needed you, Thorne. I needed your side of the story on record. You running made you look guilty. I ran because nobody would believe me." Jacob's voice was rough. "A drifter with no money and a hard past against a rich businessman? I didn't stand a chance. You might have stood more of a chance than you think. But that's water under the bridge now." Grant stood. "Jacob Thorne, I'm prepared to clear you of all charges related to Frank Morrison's murder. The evidence points to Warren Hayes, and I'll be issuing a warrant for his arrest. You're free to go." The words hung in the air, impossible and beautiful. Charlotte felt tears spring to her eyes, her hands flying to her mouth. "Free? He's really free?" "He's really free." Grant smiled slightly. "Though I'd recommend staying in town a few more days. I'll need official statements from both of you. And there's the matter of those bounty hunters outside who think they're getting paid. I'll need to explain why they're not." Jacob stood slowly, like he couldn't quite believe it. "Marshal, I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. Don't thank me. Thank that foreman who found his conscience. And thank Mrs. Pierce here for believing in you enough to risk everything." Grant's gaze shifted to Charlotte, something knowing in his eyes. "Though I suspect there's more to your story than you told me. You didn't have to come with him, ma'am. You had a perfectly good excuse to walk away after that stagecoach crash. Yet you didn't. That speaks to something deeper than just believing a man's innocent." Charlotte felt heat flood her face, but she met the marshal's eyes steadily. "You're right, Marshal. I came with Jacob. Because I love him. Because he's a good man who deserved someone in his corner. And I don't regret a single moment of it. Consequences be damned. Grant's smile widened. I thought as much. Well, that's your business, not mine. But if you're planning to stay together, might I suggest making it legal? Frontier towns can be hard on unmarried couples, and you've both been through enough without adding that complication. Jacob turned to Charlotte, his eyes searching hers. Is that what you want? To make this legal? To marry me for real? Charlotte's heart felt like it might burst. Jacob Thorne, are you proposing? I'm asking. His voice was soft, tender. I've got nothing to offer you but a cleared name and a whole lot of love. No money, no prospects, no guarantee of an easy life. But if you'll have me, I swear I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. So Charlotte Pierce, will you marry me? There was only one possible answer. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Jacob pulled her into his arms, kissing her right there in the marshal's office. And Charlotte didn't care who saw or what anyone thought. He was free. They were free. Everything they'd risked, everything they'd survived, had led to this moment. When they finally broke apart, Marshal Grant was chuckling. I'll take that as a yes. There's a preacher 2 streets over. If you're serious about this, I'd recommend going today before word gets around about Hayes. Things might get complicated when I arrest him, and you'd be better off as husband and wife for legal purposes. Today? Charlotte looked down at her worn, practical dress, at her wind-burned hands and unkempt hair. I'm hardly dressed for a wedding. You're beautiful, Jacob said simply. You've always been beautiful, and I don't want to wait another day to call you my wife. So they went to the preacher that very afternoon, with Marshal Grant standing witness. Charlotte wore the simple dress Mrs. Garrett had given her, and Jacob wore his trail-worn clothes, and neither of them could have cared less. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, but when Jacob slipped a plain silver band onto Charlotte's finger, purchased with the last of his money from a jeweler down the street, she felt like the richest woman in the world. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher intoned. You may kiss your bride. Jacob cupped Charlotte's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness, such reverence, that she felt tears slip down her cheeks. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Mrs. Thorne, he whispered. My wife. My husband. Charlotte smiled through her tears. I like the sound of that. That night, they stayed in a modest hotel room that felt like a palace after weeks of sleeping rough. Marshal Grant had advanced them some money against the reward he said Charlotte was due for helping clear up the Morrison case. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a few nights' lodging and some decent meals. Lying in a real bed, with Jacob's arms around her, his ring on her finger, Charlotte felt happiness so complete it was almost frightening. What are we going to do now? She asked, tracing patterns on his chest. Where do we go from here? Anywhere you want. Jacob pressed a kiss to her hair. We're free, Charlotte. Truly free. We can go to Montana like we planned, or stay here in Wyoming, or head back to Colorado. The world's open to us now. I want to build a home. The words surprised her, but once spoken, Charlotte knew they were true. Not just a house, but a real home. Somewhere we can put down roots, be part of a community. Somewhere safe. Then that's what we'll do. Jacob tightened his arms around her. We'll find a place. Buy some land. I can work cattle, you can... What do you want to do, Charlotte? What dreams did you have before life got in the way? Charlotte thought about it, remembering the girl she'd been before marriage, before widowhood. I wanted to teach. Before I married James, I taught at a small school in St. Louis. I loved it, helping children learn, watching their faces light up when something clicked. But when James enlisted, I had to give it up to follow him. Then you'll teach again. We'll find a town that needs a school teacher, and you'll help kids learn to read, just like you helped me. Jacob's voice was warm with pride. You're good at it, Charlotte. You've got a gift for making complicated things simple. What about you? What do you want? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I want normal. I want to work hard, come home to you, maybe have a family someday. I want to go to sleep without wondering if tonight's the night someone comes to arrest me. I want boring, Charlotte. Beautifully, wonderfully boring. Charlotte laughed softly. After the last month, boring sounds perfect. They talked late into the night, making plans, dreaming dreams. They'd stay in Cheyenne long enough for the legal matters to be settled, then head north to Montana Territory, where land was still cheap and plentiful. They'd find a place near a town that needed a school teacher. Jacob would work whatever jobs he could find while they saved for their own property. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be theirs. The next 3 days passed in a blur of official statements and legal proceedings. Charlotte told her story to the territorial judge, providing details about Hayes' threats and behavior. Jacob gave his account of finding Morrison and his subsequent flight. The foreman testified about Hayes paying him to lie, and piece by piece, the case against Warren Hayes built into something insurmountable. Hayes himself was arrested trying to flee Cheyenne. He'd gotten word somehow about the investigation heating up and had made a run for it. The marshal's men caught him 20 miles out of town with saddlebags full of cash and fraudulent documents. His trial was set for early January, and everyone from the judge to the local newspaper editor agreed the evidence was damning. Jacob and Charlotte attended the preliminary hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom and listening to Hayes try to spin his lies. But without the foreman backing his story, without his credibility, Hayes' testimony fell apart under cross-examination. When the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, and that Hayes would be held without bail, Charlotte felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was really over. Hayes couldn't hurt them anymore. As they left the courthouse, they ran into the foreman, a weathered man named Samuel, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He stopped when he saw Jacob, his face crumpling with emotion. "I'm sorry," Samuel said hoarsely. "I'm so damn sorry. I let Hayes pay me to lie about you, and I've regretted it every day since. I tried to tell myself you were probably guilty anyway, that it didn't matter. But I knew. God help me. I knew you were innocent, and I let you take the fall because I needed the money." Jacob studied him for a long moment, then held out his hand. "You told the truth in the end. That's what matters. You did the right thing, Samuel. It took courage." Samuel shook Jacob's hand with tears in his eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not, but I'm giving it anyway." Jacob glanced at Charlotte, who smiled her approval. "Life's too short to carry hate around. You've got to live with your conscience. That's punishment enough." They left Samuel standing there, looking shattered and relieved all at once. As they walked back toward the hotel, Charlotte slipped her hand into Jacob's. That was generous of you. He gave us our lives back. Seems like the least I can do is not hate him for making a mistake. Jacob squeezed her hand. Besides, I'm too happy to hate anyone right now. I've got you. I'm a free man, and we've got a whole future ahead of us. Why would I waste time on anger? Charlotte leaned into his side as they walked. When do you want to leave for Montana? Soon as the trial's done and we get that reward money. Marshall says it should be released to us by next week. Jacob's face grew thoughtful. I was thinking, with that money, we could buy a decent piece of land right off. Not have to work for years to save up. Maybe get some cattle, a few horses, start building our life right away, instead of waiting. That sounds wonderful. Charlotte could picture it already. A small ranch in Montana, a house they build together, maybe a few children running around in time. A simple, ordinary life that felt impossibly precious after everything they'd been through. Jacob, do you think we'll really get our happily ever after? Or is that just something that happens in stories? He stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands framing her face. Charlotte, we've survived a blizzard, bounty hunters, and a murderer trying to frame me. We've crossed territories, slept rough, gone hungry, and still chose each other every single day. If that's not earning a happily ever after, I don't know what is. So yes, I think we'll get it. I think we'll build something beautiful together. And when we're old and gray, we'll look back on these crazy weeks and marvel that we made it through. Charlotte stretched up and kissed him, right there on the Cheyenne street with people walking past and staring. She didn't care anymore about propriety or scandal or what anyone thought. She'd stopped caring somewhere in that snowbound cabin, and she'd never looked back. I love you, Jacob Thorne. I love you too, Charlotte Thorne. Forever. The trial took place in early January, drawing crowds from across the territory. Warren Hayes' fall from grace was spectacular and public, his crimes laid bare for all to see. The evidence was overwhelming, testimony damning. Hayes tried to maintain his innocence, tried to paint Jacob as the villain, but without any credible support, his defense crumbled. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Warren Hayes was sentenced to hang for the murder of Frank Morrison, with additional time added for fraud, attempted bribery, and conspiracy. As the sentence was read, Hayes's face went pale, his expensive veneer finally cracking to reveal the desperate, evil man underneath. Jacob squeezed Charlotte's hand through it all, his face carefully neutral. But when they left the courthouse, Charlotte felt him shaking. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I'm free. The words came out choked, full of emotion. Charlotte, I'm really free. My name is cleared. Hayes is going to pay for what he did. I can stop running. I can build a life. I can be a husband to you without looking over my shoulder. He turned to her, and his eyes were wet with unshed tears. Do you know how long I've dreamed of this? Of being able to walk down a street without fear? Of having a future? Charlotte pulled him into her arms right there on the courthouse steps, holding him as he finally let himself feel the weight of everything they'd survived. People stared, but she didn't care. Her husband needed her, and nothing else mattered. That evening, Marshall Grant invited them to dinner at the hotel restaurant, a celebration of sorts. Over roast beef and potatoes, the first truly good meal they'd had in months, Grant raised his glass in a toast. To Jacob and Charlotte Thorne, may your future be as bright as your past was dark. They drank, and Charlotte felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the wine. They'd made it. Against all odds, against every obstacle, they'd survived and won. Now the real work began, the work of building a life together, but that seemed easy compared to what they'd already overcome. The reward money will be released tomorrow, Grant said. $800 total. $500 for Thorne's capture, which goes to you since you helped solve the case, Mrs. Thorne, and $300 for Hayes' arrest, which I'm splitting with you since your testimony was crucial. He smiled. Should be enough to get you started in Montana. More than enough. Jacob's voice was thick with gratitude. Marshall, I don't know how to thank you. You believed me when nobody else would. I believed the evidence, and I believed your wife, who was willing to risk everything to stand by you. That kind of loyalty isn't easy to fake. Grant's expression grew serious. But Thorne, you need to understand something. What you've been given is a second chance, a clean slate. Don't waste it. Build that life you talked about. Be the man your wife believes you are. I will. I swear it. The next morning, they collected the reward money from the bank, the weight of the coins in the leather pouch feeling almost unreal. $800 was more money than Charlotte had ever held at once. Enough to buy land and livestock and supplies and still have money left over for emergencies. They were truly starting fresh, with nothing holding them back. They left Cheyenne 3 days later, on a cold January morning, having purchased 2 horses, warm winter gear, and supplies for the journey north. The town had been good to them, giving them justice and a new beginning. But they were both eager to move on, to leave the past behind and start building their future. The journey to Montana Territory took 2 weeks. They traveled slowly, no longer running, able to enjoy the stark beauty of winter in the high country. They stayed at ranches and homesteads along the way, offering pay for food and lodging, hearing stories about the territories further north. Several people recommended the area around Helena, said there was good land available and growing communities that needed settlers. They reached Helena in late January, a bustling town in a valley surrounded by mountains. It was bigger than Charlotte expected, with real streets and businesses, a church and a school. They spent a week there, talking to the land office, riding out to look at available properties, getting a sense of the area and its people. It was 20 miles north of Helena that they found it, 160 acres in a sheltered valley, with a creek running through it and good grazing land. There was a small, run-down cabin on the property, barely livable but structurally sound. The previous owner had died, and his family was selling cheap, eager to be rid of frontier land they'd never wanted. Jacob walked the property line with Charlotte, both of them silent as they took it in. Mountains rose on 3 sides, protecting the valley from the worst winds. Pine trees covered the slopes, and the creek ran clear and cold. It was isolated, but not dangerously so. Close enough to neighbors for community, but far enough for privacy. "What do you think?" Jacob asked, stopping at the crest of a small hill that overlooked the valley. Charlotte looked out at the land, imagining what it could become. The cabin repaired and expanded. A barn for horses and cattle. Gardens and fences. Maybe children playing in the creek someday. Home. This could be home. "I think it's perfect," she said softly. "I think this is where we're meant to be." Jacob's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then let's buy it. Let's build our life here, Charlotte. You and me, together. They returned to Helena and signed the papers that very day, paying $300 for the land and leaving them with $500 for livestock and improvements. It was more than enough. They were landowners now, property holders, settlers building a future in Montana territory. The cabin was worse than they'd thought once they really looked at it. The roof leaked, the floor was rotted in places, and the single room was barely 12 feet square. But it was theirs, and they set about making it livable with determination and hope. Jacob repaired the roof while Charlotte cleaned years of dust and mouse droppings. They chinked the gaps between logs with mud and grass, replaced the broken window with oiled paper until they could afford glass, and built a proper door that actually closed all the way. It took 3 weeks of hard work, but by mid-February, the cabin was weather-tight and warm. Jacob had built a real bed frame, and Charlotte had sewn curtains from cloth purchased in Helena. They had a table and 2 chairs, a cook stove that actually worked, and shelves for their few possessions. It wasn't much, but it was more than either of them had dreamed of having. The nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, lived 5 miles south. They arrived one afternoon with a basket of bread and preserves, welcoming the newcomers. Samuel and Martha Johnson were in their 50s, weathered but kind, with 5 grown children scattered across the territory. Martha took to Charlotte immediately, offering advice about surviving Montana winters and inviting them to church services in Helena every Sunday. "Town's growing fast," Samuel said, helping Jacob plan where to build a barn. "Needs more folks willing to put in the work. You two seem like the type who'll stick it out." "We're not going anywhere," Jacob said, glancing at Charlotte with such love it made her chest ache. "We've come too far to give up now." As winter softened into early spring, they fell into a routine that felt right in a way nothing ever had before. Jacob worked the land, clearing brush, building fences, planning for the cattle they'd buy come summer. Charlotte made the cabin into a home, sowing and cooking and tending the first tentative vegetables she planted in the thawed ground near the creek. They worked hard from sunrise to sunset, collapsing exhausted into bed each night. But it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from building something meaningful. In March, Charlotte made a trip into Helena and stopped at the small schoolhouse. The teacher, an older woman named Mrs. Whitmore, was preparing to retire at the end of the term. The town needed a new teacher, preferably someone young enough to handle the rougher students, but experienced enough to teach multiple grades. "I taught in St. Louis before I married," Charlotte explained, "and I've tutored students since. I'd like to apply for the position." Mrs. Whitmore studied her shrewdly. "You're Jacob Thorne's wife, aren't you? The couple who bought the Morrison property north of town?" "Yes, ma'am. I heard about what happened in Cheyenne. About Hayes and the trial." Mrs. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. Some folks might have concerns about a woman who ran off with an accused murderer teaching their children. Charlotte held her ground. "My husband was innocent and has been completely exonerated. I made my choice based on truth and love, not scandal. And I'm a good teacher, Mrs. Whitmore. Give me a chance to prove it." The older woman was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I like you, Mrs. Thorne. You've got spine. Come back next week and teach a sample lesson for the school board. If they approve, the job's yours starting in September." Charlotte returned to the ranch floating on air. Jacob was repairing the corral when she rode up, and the joy on her face must have been obvious, because he dropped his hammer and strode over to help her down from the horse. "What happened? You look like you won the lottery." "Better. I might have a teaching position starting in the fall. I have to audition for the school board, but Mrs. Whitmore thinks I'll get it." Charlotte threw her arms around his neck. "Jacob, I could be a teacher again. I could do what I love and help our community and earn money for the ranch all at once." He spun her around, both of them laughing like children. "That's incredible, Charlotte. You'll be amazing. Those kids won't know what hit them. It's only 3 days a week during the school year, so I'll still have time for the ranch. And the pay isn't much, but every little bit helps." Charlotte pulled back to look at him, her heart so full it hurt. "We're really doing this, aren't it? Building a life? Being normal? We're really doing it." Jacob kissed her softly. "And Charlotte, there's something I want to tell you. Something I should have said weeks ago." "What?" "I'm happy. Truly, deeply happy. For the first time since Samuel died, I wake up excited for the day ahead. I go to sleep grateful for everything we have. You gave me that, Charlotte. You gave me hope when I'd forgotten what it felt like. You gave me a reason to fight for tomorrow instead of just surviving today. You gave me everything." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave me everything too. You reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling. You made me brave enough to choose love over safety. You're my home, Jacob. Not this ranch, not Montana. You." They stood there in the spring sunlight, holding each other. Two people who'd found each other in a blizzard and refused to let go. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but bright, full of promise and possibility. Charlotte got the teaching position. Her sample lesson on basic arithmetic so impressed the school board that they offered her the job on the spot, with the possibility of expanding to 5 days a week if enrollment increased. She'd start in September, giving her the summer to prepare and help Jacob with the ranch. They used some of their remaining money to buy 6 head of cattle and a breeding pair of pigs. Jacob built a small barn, and Charlotte planted a proper vegetable garden. The Johnsons introduced them to other neighbors, and slowly they became part of the community. Church on Sundays, barn raisings when someone needed help, communal meals where everyone brought something to share. It was the kind of life Charlotte had dreamed of, but never thought she'd have. Summer in Montana was glorious. Long days of sunshine and hard work. Evenings spent sitting on the porch Jacob built, watching the sun set behind the mountains. They talked endlessly, about everything and nothing, building a foundation of shared stories and dreams. Jacob continued his reading lessons, progressing from simple texts to more complex material. He developed a particular love for poetry, which surprised them both, and took to reading verses aloud to Charlotte as they worked. One evening in late July, as they sat watching the stars emerge, Charlotte felt Jacob's hand slide to her stomach. "Charlotte, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Do you want children? We've never really talked about it, but I need to know. Because if you do, I want that too. I want to fill this ranch with kids and noise and chaos. But if you don't, if you're happy with just us, that's enough for me." Charlotte covered his hand with hers, emotion swelling in her chest. "I want children. I want your children. I want to watch you teach them to ride and read and be good people. I want little girls with your eyes and little boys with my stubbornness. I want it all. Jacob. His smile was radiant. Then we'll have it. All of it. As much as life wants to give us. By August, Charlotte had her lesson plans prepared and was working with Mrs. Whitmore to understand the particular needs of frontier students. Some of the children had never been to school before, while others were well advanced. Charlotte would be teaching everything from basic letters to complex mathematics, history to geography, all in one room, with students ranging from 6 to 16. The challenge excited her. This was what she'd been meant to do, what she'd loved before circumstances forced her to give it up. And now she had it back, along with everything else she'd thought lost forever. A home, a husband who loved her, purpose and community. It felt like a miracle. September arrived with the first hints of autumn color in the aspens. Charlotte's first day of school was nerve-wracking and wonderful. 23 students showed up, ranging from tiny 6-year-olds to strapping teenage boys who clearly expected to intimidate the new teacher. But Charlotte had learned toughness in the 2 years since James died, had learned to stand her ground against worse than sullen teenagers. By the end of the first week, she had the class running smoothly, even the troublemakers grudgingly respecting her firm but fair approach. Jacob threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, knowing Charlotte was happy and fulfilled. He took on occasional work with neighbors, earning extra money and building relationships. The community came to respect Jacob Thorne as a man who worked hard, kept his word, and treated everyone fairly. If anyone remembered the murder accusations from Cheyenne, they never mentioned it. Here, Jacob was simply a good neighbor and Charlotte's devoted husband. As autumn deepened and the first snows dusted the mountain peaks, Charlotte realized she'd missed her monthly courses. Twice. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, afraid it might be stress or poor nutrition finally catching up with her. But by late October, she couldn't deny the truth. The morning sickness, the exhaustion, the way her body felt different. She was pregnant. She told Jacob on a Sunday evening as they sat by the fire, mending harness leather and sewing by lamplight. "Jacob, I need to tell you something." He looked up, immediately alert to the tone in her voice. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right, actually." Charlotte set down her sewing and took his hands. "Jacob, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her, processing the words. Then his face transformed, joy spreading across his features like sunrise. "A baby? Charlotte, are you sure?" "I'm sure. I've missed 2 courses, and I'm sick every morning. I'd say I'm about 2 months along. The baby should come in May." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby," he whispered into her hair. "Charlotte, we're going to be parents. We're going to have a family. Are you happy?" Charlotte pulled back to see his face. "Happy? I'm terrified and thrilled, and so full of love I think I might burst." He laid his hand on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby in there. Our baby. Part of you and part of me. Becoming a whole new person. How could I not be happy?" They spent the evening making plans, talking about names and cradles, and how they'd manage when Charlotte had to take time off from teaching. Jacob was adamant that she stop working by March, give herself time to rest before the birth. Charlotte argued she could work longer, but the fierce protectiveness in his eyes made her relent. He'd already lost so much in his life. She wouldn't risk their child just to prove a point. Winter came early and hard that year, but Charlotte felt cocooned in warmth and love. The morning sickness faded by December, and she bloomed with pregnancy, her figure rounding, her skin glowing. Jacob was impossibly attentive, doing extra chores so she could rest, reading to her in the evenings, building a cradle by the fire with wood he'd carefully selected and sanded smooth. Martha Johnson visited often, bringing advice and supplies, helping Charlotte prepare for the birth. The community rallied around them, as frontier communities did, bringing baby clothes and blankets, offering to help when the time came. Charlotte felt embraced by these people who'd been strangers less than a year ago. This was what it meant to belong, to be part of something larger than yourself. By March, Charlotte's belly was round and prominent, the baby moving constantly. She'd stopped teaching as promised, spending her days preparing the cabin, sewing tiny clothes, reading everything she could find about childbirth and infant care. Jacob was beside himself with anticipation and anxiety, jumping at every wince or gasp, convinced the baby was coming early. "You're like a cat on hot bricks," Charlotte laughed one afternoon watching him pace. "The baby isn't due for 2 more months. You can't keep this up, or you'll be a wreck by May. I just want you both safe. I want everything to go perfectly." Jacob knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Charlotte, I'm terrified. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" "You won't lose me." Charlotte cupped his face. "Women have babies every day, Jacob. I'm healthy and strong, and Martha will be here to help. Everything will be fine." But she understood his fear. He'd lost his brother, lost years of his life to running and fear. The thought of losing her, of losing this family they'd built, was unbearable to him. So she held him and reassured him, and tried to believe her own words. April brought warm winds and melting snow, the valley transforming from white to green almost overnight. Charlotte nested, cleaning and organizing obsessively, arranging and rearranging the tiny clothes in the trunk Jacob had built. The baby kicked and rolled, running out of room, and Charlotte found herself talking to her belly, telling this little person about the world they'd soon enter. On a warm May morning, 3 weeks before the baby was due, Charlotte woke to wetness between her legs and a deep, cramping pain in her lower back. She lay still for a moment, processing, then touched Jacob's shoulder. "Jacob! Wake up! The baby's coming!" He was instantly alert, scrambling from the bed. "Now? But it's too early. You said May 20th. It's only the 1st. Babies come when they're ready, not when we schedule them." Charlotte breathed through another cramp. "Send Samuel for Martha, and then you need to boil water and get the linens we prepared." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and effort and fear. Martha arrived and took charge, calm and capable, coaching Charlotte through the contractions. Jacob hovered anxiously until Martha ordered him outside, told him he was making Charlotte nervous with his pacing. He spent the day chopping wood and wearing a path in the dirt, jumping every time he heard Charlotte cry out. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in gold and amber light, Charlotte gave a final push, and a baby's cry split the air. Martha's delighted laugh followed. "It's a girl! Charlotte, you have a beautiful baby girl!" Jacob heard the cry and burst through the door, propriety forgotten. Charlotte lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, but smiling with such radiance it took his breath away. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the tiniest, most perfect human he'd ever seen. "Come meet your daughter," Charlotte said softly. Jacob approached slowly, reverently, as if afraid he might break the spell. He knelt beside the bed and looked down at the baby. Dark hair, a wrinkled red face, impossibly small fingers. His daughter. His and Charlotte's daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Charlotte, she's absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold her?" Martha helped transfer the baby to Jacob's arms, showing him how to support the head. He cradled his daughter with infinite care, his eyes wet with tears. This tiny person was part of him, part of Charlotte, a miracle they'd created together. She opened her eyes and seemed to study his face, and Jacob felt his heart expand to a size he hadn't known was possible. "What should we name her?" Charlotte asked. They discussed names for months, but never quite decided. Now, looking at his daughter's face, Jacob knew. Hope. Her name should be Hope, because she represents everything we hoped for, everything we fought for. Our hope made real. Hope Thorne. Charlotte tested the name, then smiled. "It's perfect. She's Hope." Martha stayed for 3 days, teaching Charlotte how to nurse, how to change cloths, how to soothe a fussy baby. Jacob was a devoted but nervous father, terrified he'd hurt Hope with his rough hands. But Charlotte guided him, showed him how strong babies actually were, and gradually, he relaxed into the role. When Martha finally left, assuring them they'd be fine, Jacob and Charlotte found themselves alone with their daughter for the first time. That night, with Hope sleeping in her cradle beside their bed, they lay holding hands in the darkness. "We did it," Charlotte whispered. "We survived everything and made it here. We have a home, a family, a future. We actually did it." "We did." Jacob squeezed her hand. "Charlotte, do you remember that first night in the cabin? When the storm was raging and we were both terrified and trying not to show it? I remember everything about that night. I knew then. Even then I knew you were extraordinary. But I never imagined this. I never imagined I'd be lying here in my own home with my wife beside me and my daughter sleeping peacefully. I never imagined I'd get to be this happy." Charlotte rolled to face him, their faces inches apart in the darkness. "I love you, Jacob Thorne. I loved you in that cabin, and I loved you through every mile we traveled, and I'll love you for the rest of my life. You gave me everything I thought I'd lost forever. You gave me love and hope and family. You gave me a reason to wake up excited for the day, instead of dreading it. You saved me first," Jacob said. "You saw past the wanted poster and the reputation and the rough edges. You saw the man I was trying to be, not the man everyone assumed I was. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one. You loved me when I couldn't love myself." They kissed in the darkness, soft and sweet, while their daughter slept and the night sounds of Montana drifted through the window. Outside, an owl hooted. The creek bubbled over stones. The wind whispered through pine trees. All the sounds of home, of peace, of a life hard won and deeply cherished. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful. Hope proved to be a good baby, fussy only when hungry or wet, sleeping in longer stretches as she grew. Charlotte healed quickly, and by July was back to light work around the ranch. Jacob doted on his daughter shamelessly, carrying her everywhere in a sling Charlotte had made, talking to her constantly, reading to her from his growing collection of books. Charlotte returned to teaching in September, bringing hope with her to the schoolhouse. The students were enchanted with the baby, the older girls fighting for the privilege of holding her during breaks. It worked surprisingly well. Hope napping in a basket while Charlotte taught, nursing during lunch, being passed from careful student hands to careful student hands throughout the day. The ranch prospered. Their cattle multiplied. Their garden produced abundantly. And the small savings they'd carefully hoarded grew into something substantial. By Hope's first birthday, they'd expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a room for Hope. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and warm, and theirs. Other children followed. A son, James, born when Hope was 2. Then another daughter, Grace, 2 years after that. Each birth was easier than the last, though Jacob never stopped being terrified until mother and baby were safe. Their home filled with noise and chaos and laughter, exactly as Jacob had dreamed. By their 5th anniversary, the Thorns were well-established members of the community. Jacob served on the town council. Charlotte taught school 9 months of the year and managed to raise 3 children and a thriving ranch. They had neighbors they called friends, a community that embraced them, and a legacy they were building for their children. One evening in late autumn, when the children were finally asleep and the house was blessedly quiet, Jacob and Charlotte sat on their porch wrapped in blankets against the chill. The valley spread below them, golden with aspens, peaceful and beautiful. "Do you ever think about that cabin?" Charlotte asked. "The one where we were stranded?" "All the time." Jacob's arm tightened around her. "It changed everything. Changed me. Changed us. If that storm hadn't hit, if you'd made it to Denver, we never would have found each other. Our children wouldn't exist. This life wouldn't exist." "I don't believe that." Charlotte looked up at him. "I think we were meant to find each other, Jacob. Maybe not in that exact way. Maybe not in that exact cabin. But somehow, somewhere, we would have collided. Because some people are just meant to be together. You think we're soulmates?" There was gentle teasing in his voice, but also wonder. "I think we're 2 broken people who found each other and decided to heal together. I think we're 2 survivors who refused to give up. I think we're 2 hearts that recognized each other in the storm." Charlotte laced her fingers through his. "Call it whatever you want. Soulmates. Fate. Destiny. Dumb luck. All I know is I'm grateful for every single moment, even the scary ones. Especially the scary ones. Because they led us here." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, just holding her, looking out at the land they'd claimed and the home they'd built. Finally, he said, "The blizzard forced us into that cabin. But what we did to stay warm, what we built between us, that changed everything. It gave us this. All of this. No regrets?" "Not a single one." Jacob kissed the top of her head. "I'd do it all again, Charlotte. Every terrifying, uncertain, desperate moment. Because it brought me to you, and you brought me to life." They sat there as the stars emerged one by one, painting the sky with light. In the distance, a wolf howled. The first snow of winter was coming. They could smell it in the air. But inside their home, their children slept safe and warm. The fire burned bright. The cupboards were full. And two people who'd found each other in a blizzard sat together, wrapped in love and gratitude for the beautiful, ordinary life they'd built from nothing. The storm had forced them together, but love had made them stay. The years continued to roll forward like the seasons, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Hope grew into a bright, curious child with Charlotte's intelligence and Jacob's determination. She learned to read before she was 5, devouring every book her parents could get for her. James was quieter, more thoughtful, happiest when working alongside his father with the horses and cattle. And Grace was pure sunshine, laughing more than crying, finding joy in every moment. Jacob taught all 3 children to ride almost before they could walk. He taught them to read and write with the same dedication Charlotte had shown him. He taught them about hard work and honesty, about standing up for what was right even when it was hard. And most importantly, he taught them by example what it meant to love someone completely, showing them every day how he cherished their mother. Charlotte watched her children grow with fierce pride and occasional terror. The frontier was still dangerous, still unpredictable. But she and Jacob had learned to trust each other, to face challenges together, to build something strong enough to weather any storm. Their marriage had been forged in crisis, but it deepened in the ordinary moments. Morning coffee shared before the children woke, stolen kisses while doing chores, quiet conversations after long days. The accumulation of 1,000 small intimacies that wove their lives together into something unbreakable. On their 10th anniversary, Jacob surprised Charlotte with a gift. He'd been working on it for months in secret, carving and sanding late into the night after she'd gone to sleep. When he presented it, Charlotte gasped with delight. It was a wooden sign, beautifully crafted, that read Hope's Haven Ranch, Est. 1876. For our daughter, Jacob explained, and for what we built here. This place has been our haven, Charlotte. Our refuge from everything that tried to destroy us. I wanted to mark it, make it official. This is our legacy. Charlotte traced the letters with her fingers, tears streaming down her face. It's perfect, Jacob. Absolutely perfect. They hung the sign over the ranch entrance, and it became a landmark for the community. Hope's Haven Ranch, where the Thorns lived, where children were always welcome, where neighbors knew they could find help in hard times. Jacob and Charlotte had built more than a ranch. They'd built a sanctuary, a place of healing and hope and love. As the children grew older and more independent, Charlotte found time to expand her teaching. She started a small lending library in town, donating books and encouraging literacy. Jacob took on a larger role in community governance, helping mediate disputes and plan improvements. Together, they became pillars of the community, respected and loved for their kindness and fairness. But through it all, through the successes and the struggles, the joy and the occasional heartache, they never forgot where they'd started. That cabin in the storm, that desperate gamble on love, that moment when Charlotte chose Jacob over safety, and Jacob chose to let himself hope again. On a winter evening much like the one where their story began, when a blizzard raged outside and the fire crackled warm inside, Charlotte found herself thinking about that first night. The children were grown now, Hope married and living on her own homestead nearby, James working the ranch with Jacob, Grace away at Teachers College in Helena. The house that had once burst with noise was quieter now, just her and Jacob most evenings. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, settling beside her on the couch they'd bought to replace the hard wooden chairs. "The beginning. That storm. that tiny cabin where we were trapped. Charlotte leaned into him. "We've come so far, Jacob. Sometimes I can barely believe we're the same people who huddled by that fire, terrified and desperate and falling in love without admitting it. We're not the same people." Jacob's arm came around her shoulders. "We're better, stronger. We've been tested by time and hardship and come through it together. That scared widow and wanted man, they were just the beginning of us. We've spent 20 years becoming who we were always meant to be. And who's that? Partners, best friends, parents, grandparents, soon enough if hope has her way." Jacob smiled. Two people who learned that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Charlotte turned to look at him, seeing the silver threading through his dark hair, the deepening lines around his eyes, the weathering of time and hard work. He was 52 now, still strong, but showing his age. And she loved him more now than she had at 29. Loved him with a depth that came from truly knowing someone, from choosing them every day for 2 decades. "I love you, Jacob Thorne. I loved you in that cabin. And I love you now. And I'll love you until my last breath. I love you too, Charlotte Thorne. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. The storm brought us together, but you made me want to stay. You made me believe I deserved happiness. You made me whole." They kissed, soft and sweet, 20 years of love in that single gesture. Outside, the blizzard howled just like it had that first night. But inside Hope's Haven Ranch, all was warm and safe and good. The fire burned bright, casting dancing shadows on walls covered with family photographs and children's drawings. In the kitchen, bread dough rose for tomorrow's breakfast. In the barn, animals slept warm and protected. And in the living room, two people who'd found each other against all odds held each other close and gave thanks for the beautiful life they'd built from a storm and a prayer and love that refused to die. The blizzard had forced them into a one-room cabin. What they did to stay warm changed everything. It gave them love, family, purpose, and a life beyond anything they dared to dream. And 20 years later, sitting in the warmth of the home they'd built together, with their children grown and their grandchildren soon to come, Jacob and Charlotte Thorne understood what true wealth meant. Not money or land or possessions, but this, the ability to sit beside someone you love completely and know without doubt that you'd choose them again. That every hardship was worth it. That every risk led to reward beyond measure. "Do you remember what you said to me that 4th morning?" Charlotte asked softly. "When the storm ended and we were standing in the snow saying goodbye? I said a lot of things that morning. You said you'd find me again. If you got free, you'd find me." Charlotte smiled. "You kept that promise, Jacob. You found me, and you never let go." "No." Jacob pulled her closer. "I never let go, and I never will." The blizzard outside raged through the night, but inside Hope's Haven Ranch, all was peace. Two hearts that had found each other in the storm beat in rhythm. Two lives that had intertwined by chance and choice continued on, together, exactly as they were always meant to be. Some loves are quiet and easy. Others are born in crisis and tempered by fire. Jacob and Charlotte's love was the second kind, forged in desperation and hardship. But it proved stronger than any challenge life could throw at them. They'd survived the storm, survived the accusations, survived poverty and danger, and doubt. And in surviving together, they'd built something beautiful. Something lasting. Something that would echo through generations. In the children they raised, and the grandchildren yet to come. In the ranch that bore their legacy. In the love that refused to die no matter how cold the winter or how fierce the wind. The blizzard forced them together. But love, real love, kept them together. Through 20 winters and 20 springs. Through joy and sorrow. Through the ordinary and the extraordinary. Together, always together, until the very end. And that was the greatest gift the storm ever gave them. Not just each other, but the knowledge that true love, the kind worth having, is worth any risk, any sacrifice, any leap of faith into the unknown. As the fire burned low and sleep called them to bed, Jacob and Charlotte rose together, still hand in hand after all these years, and climbed the stairs to the room they shared. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. It had always been enough.